There is a tree above Big Bear where two bald eagles spent an entire morning doing almost nothing at all. They perched. They shifted their weight. One of them called across the water, and the other one answered. Then they stayed. Hours passed. Neither eagle left. One of those eagles is Shadow. He has lived in this valley for years, in this exact stretch of pines, beside a nest that most of you have watched through a camera for longer than you probably want to admit. The other eagle is a stranger. Her name is KD1. She was not born here. She did not grow up here. And until a few weeks ago, nobody watching Big Bear had ever seen her before. She keeps coming back. That is the part everyone has been asking about. Not that she showed up once, but that she will not stop showing up. And there is a moment from August 13th that I think most people watching that day missed completely. It lasted only a few seconds, and on its own it means almost nothing. Paired with everything that came after it, it becomes the single most interesting thing in this entire story. I will come back to it. Because the question that has been following KD1 since the beginning may be the wrong question. We keep asking why she comes back. Maybe we should be asking what happens if she stops leaving. Let's go back to the start. August 6th. A young bald eagle lands in Big Bear, and viewers notice something on her leg almost immediately. A band. A distinctive lavender one, wrapped around her leg like a name tag she never agreed to wear. That band is the reason we know anything about her at all. Most wild eagles are anonymous. They arrive, they leave, and nobody can tell you where they came from. KD1 is different. The band connects her to a completely different part of Southern California. She was banded as an eaglet in the Prado Basin in 2022, roughly 70 miles from the tree she is now perched in. She is about 4.5 years old. That number matters more than it sounds like it should, and we will get to why. But here is the thing I want to be honest about early, because it is easy to skip past this part when a story starts getting interesting. There was nothing extraordinary about KD1 arriving in Big Bear. Nothing at all. Bald eagles travel. Young ones especially. Before an eagle settles anywhere permanently, it can spend years drifting between lakes, rivers, reservoirs and forests, testing places out, looking for open habitat that nobody else has claimed yet. Wandering is not unusual behavior for a bird her age. Wandering is the job. So KD1 could have done what almost every young eagle does. She could have circled the lake, found the fish, rested in one of the tall pines, spent a night, and moved on to the next valley. That would have been the ordinary version of this story. That is the version where none of us ever learn her name. But she didn't. She came back. Then she came back again. And then she kept coming back. This is where I have to be careful, because this is exactly the point where a wildlife story turns into a fantasy if nobody slows it down. So let's slow it down. One visit is random. A bird flies over a lake, sees good habitat, and lands. That is not a story. Two visits could still be coincidence. Good habitat is worth checking twice. But repeated visits, to the same lake, in the same section of shoreline, near the same trees, over and over, across weeks? That is not coincidence anymore. That is a pattern. And a pattern is the first thing that separates an eagle passing through from an eagle making a decision. Except there was a second pattern forming at exactly the same time, and almost nobody was watching it at first. Shadow. Here is what should have happened. A resident adult bald eagle, holding an established territory with a known nest, sees an unfamiliar eagle drop into his airspace. That is not a friendly situation. Territory is food, shelter, and breeding opportunity. It is the whole life of the bird. Eagles defend it. Chases happen. Talons come out. Intruders leave. That is what should have happened. Watch what actually happened instead. No sustained chase. No repeated aggression. No moment where Shadow made it unmistakably clear that this eagle was not welcome here. He watched her. He perched near her. Sometimes he left the area. Sometimes she did. And then, a day or two later, she would be back, and the whole thing would repeat. Now, I want to be precise about this, because there is a very tempting sentence sitting right here, and it is the wrong sentence. The tempting sentence is, Shadow accepted her. We cannot say that. Acceptance is a conclusion, and we do not have one. What we have is an observation, and the observation is narrower and honestly more interesting. KD1 was repeatedly present. Shadow did not repeatedly drive her out. Those are two separate facts, and the gap between them is exactly where this story lives. And then she went to the nest. For anyone who has been watching Big Bear for any length of time, the nest is not just a nest. It is the center of everything. It is where the eggs were. It is where the eaglets hatched. It is where the storms hit, where the food arrived, where the long quiet hours happened that nobody clipped and nobody posted, and it is where Jackie and Shadow built a life in front of a camera for years. To us, that structure carries weight. To an eagle, it is a pile of sticks in a good tree. And KD1 started investigating it. August 13th. She entered the nest while Shadow was present. This is the moment I mentioned at the beginning, and this is the detail I think most people missed, because everyone was watching the wrong thing. Everyone was watching Shadow, waiting to see whether he would launch at her. He didn't. She moved around the nest, and she did not just stand there. She handled sticks. That is the detail. She moved nest material. And I want to be extremely careful here, because a single stick proves nothing on its own. Eagles are curious. They manipulate objects. A bird investigating an unfamiliar structure will poke at it, and that is not courtship, it is exploration. But stick work is also the language of bald eagle pairs. It is what bonded eagles do together as a season approaches. They bring material in. They arrange it. They rebuild. It is one of the most reliable behavioral signals we have. So on August 13th we did not get proof. We got a word from a vocabulary that usually shows up much later in a relationship, spoken once, by a stranger, in front of the resident male, who did nothing to stop her. Hold on to that. It matters again in about 6 minutes. Quick pause. If you appreciate this type of slow, careful look at what is actually happening in Big Bear instead of the guessing, let me know by gently tapping that like button. It genuinely helps. Now, back to the trees. Because after the nest, the story stopped being about locations and started being about distance. At the beginning, KD1 and Shadow were simply in the same territory. A large territory. Being in the same square mile as another eagle is not intimacy, it is geography. But that distance started shrinking. On one morning, both eagles were around the familiar lookout trees. Shadow flew toward the area where KD1 was already perched. He landed near her. And then the two of them stayed in that tree together for hours. Think about how far the story has moved. It started as, an unfamiliar eagle has appeared near Shadow. It has become, the same eagle keeps returning, and Shadow is choosing to spend hours next to her. There was no dramatic scene. No fight, no obvious display, no single frame where everything became clear. But that is usually how wild behavior actually changes. Not in one moment. In small increments. A few feet closer. A little longer together. One more return. One more shared branch. And then the story picked up sound. Early one morning, calls started carrying across the lake. Shadow vocalized. KD1 stayed engaged in the exchange. More calls followed. If you were watching that morning, it was almost impossible not to hear it as a conversation. And in the broadest sense, that is what it was. Two animals exchanging information. But what information? Bald eagles vocalize for a lot of reasons. They call to mates. They call at rivals. They announce presence. They react to food, to disturbance, to other birds, to nothing we can identify at all. A call is not a love letter. An answer is not proof of anything. What made those calls worth noticing was not the sound. It was the order. They came after the repeated visits. After the shared territory. After the nest. After the hours in the same tree. Context does not turn a call into evidence, but it does change what the call is worth paying attention to. And now I have to talk about the part that makes all of this harder. Jackie. She was not just another eagle to the people who watched this valley. For years, viewers watched her and Shadow rebuild that nest season after season. They watched eggs that hatched and eggs that never did. They watched storms bury the nest and watched her sit through them anyway. They watched eaglets grow up and leave. They watched entire days where nothing happened, and they watched anyway. When Jackie was gone, it left a hole in a story that people had followed for years. And then, not long after, an unfamiliar female eagle landed in Shadow's territory and started coming back. Of course people connected those two things. It would be strange if they didn't. But here is what I keep reminding myself while I put these timelines together. KD1 did not arrive because an audience needed a new character. Shadow is not making decisions based on what would feel right to the people watching. Whatever is happening between these two birds is happening for reasons that have nothing to do with us, and it will resolve on their schedule, not ours. That is not me telling you not to feel something about it. Feel whatever you want. Just don't let the feeling do the observing. Which brings me back to that number from the beginning. 4.5 years old. Bald eagles usually reach their full adult appearance around 5 years old. KD1 is right at that edge. Her head has been getting wider, though darker feathers still give away that she is not quite there. Her body has reached adult size. She can hunt. She can survive on her own. And that age is roughly when the wandering years start to end. Not always. Not on a schedule. But this is the stage of life where a young eagle stops sampling territories and starts trying to hold one. KD1 is arriving at that threshold at the exact moment she keeps returning to a valley with excellent habitat, an established nest, and a resident male who is not driving her out. That timing is either the least important coincidence in this story or the most important thing in it, and right now there is no way to tell which. So here is what would settle it. I said the stick would matter again, and this is where. One stick handled once during a nest visit is curiosity. But bald eagle pairs work on nests together. Both birds bringing material in. Both arranging it. Both spending increasing time around the structure. Both defending it. If KD1 and Shadow begin doing that repeatedly, as a unit, as the season moves on, then this stops being a collection of suggestive moments and starts being evidence. That has not happened yet. That is the behavior to watch for. Not the calls, not the shared perches, not another return. Coordinated nest work. That is the line. And she might never cross it. I want to leave room for that, because it is a real possibility and it might even be the likely one. Young eagles disappear. A bird that shows up daily for weeks can vanish and turn up 100 miles away in the spring. KD1 might keep exploring Southern California. She might find a better territory with no resident male in it. She might go back toward Prado Basin. She might treat Big Bear as one stop on a much longer route and never come back at all. If that happens, everything in this video becomes what it always might have been, a young bird passing through a good lake, and a lot of people reading meaning into it. That is a real ending. It is just not the only one. Because the other possibility is still sitting there. She could stay. And if she does, then every ambiguous moment from the last few weeks changes value. The first shared tree. The returns. The nest visit. The stick. The calls at dawn. The night spent in the same roosting area. None of those moments look like much right now. They would look like a beginning. That is the strange thing about watching wild animals in real time. You never know which moments matter until much later. A behavior that seems like nothing today becomes important when another one follows it tomorrow, and then another, and then another. Coincidence turns into pattern. Pattern turns into evidence. Evidence turns into a story we can finally tell properly. I do not think we are at the evidence yet. I think we are at the pattern. So look at how far this has actually moved. KD1 was a stranger. Then a returning stranger. Then an eagle regularly seen near shadow. Then an eagle inside the nest. Then an eagle handling nest material. Then an eagle sharing a tree with him for hours. Then an eagle trading calls with him at sunrise and roosting nearby at night. Every single one of those steps is small. The direction is what makes them worth watching. And maybe that is the biggest change of all, and it has nothing to do with any single behavior. It is that KD1 showing up is not surprising anymore. She has become familiar. To us, definitely. Possibly to Shadow. Familiarity is not a bond. But bonds are built out of it. Recognition takes repetition. Tolerance shifts slowly. Distance closes a few feet at a time. So we are back where we started, with a question that does not have an answer yet. Why does KD1 keep coming back? Maybe the habitat is simply that good. Maybe the nest is attractive. Maybe Shadow's tolerance makes this the easiest territory in the region for a young eagle to explore. Maybe she is forming a social connection with him. Maybe several of those are true at once, and the footage just cannot tell them apart. But notice that the mystery has quietly moved. Nobody is really asking whether KD1 will return anymore. She has answered that one. She returns. The question now is what all those returns are turning into. Because every time she comes back, these two birds get one more chance to interact. One more shared branch. One more call. One more night in the same stand of trees. One more piece of evidence added to a pile that is slowly getting harder to ignore. The next clue probably will not be dramatic. It will be a stick carried into the nest. A perch chosen a little closer than the last one. A call answered from a different tree. A morning when they leave the lake together. Or she will vanish, and remind us that we were watching a wandering young eagle the whole time. Either way, we learn something. But if she is still here when autumn turns over and the next breeding season starts pressing in, the question gets much harder to avoid. And at some point we may stop asking why KD1 keeps coming back to Shadow. And start asking something very different. What happens if she simply stops leaving?